Well, here's a story and a half. It looks as though the Ebola crisis is winding down, coming to an end, and naturally there are a number of post-mortems emerging. Last week, the Associated Press, the New York Times, and an extraordinary monograph evaluating the last year from Doctors Without Borders all emerged, and all of them said the same thing, that to a lesser or greater degree, the World Health Organization had failed to intercede when it should have interceded, and as a result, countless additional lives were lost. You know, if this was a private corporation rather than WHO, if it was a multinational corporation, then the chief executive officer would have been fired long ago. But Margaret Chan, the head of WHO, will not be fired. She's a Chinese national. China will not allow it to happen. The other countries will submit. And as a result, we are left with a hugely well-intentioned person of sadly mediocre qualities. However, Margaret Chan has a chance to redeem herself. There is penance in the offing, because last week also, on March 24th, was Tuberculosis Day. Last year, 9 million people contracted tuberculosis. 1.5 million died. Nearly 500,000 of them had drug-resistant tuberculosis, which means they're resistant to the basic drugs and they don't get treatment and they die. And something over 500,000 of those 9 million were children under the age of 14, 80,000 of whom died. And then there emerged last week, and this is absolutely startling, a report from the All-Party United Kingdom Committee on Tuberculosis, members of all the parties in the House of Commons, who said, after careful analysis, believe it or not, this is almost beyond belief, that unless we deal with drug-resistant tuberculosis on an emergency basis, 75 million people could die by the year 2050 at a cost of close to $17 trillion, which is the entire gross national product of the European Union on an annual basis. So naturally, there has to be some urgent response. Now, I suppose it could come from the pharmaceutical companies, except naturally they're predatory as always, and the drugs that are in the pipeline and are needed are not being developed rapidly enough, nor at prices which people can bear. All right, you say, then what about the World Health Organization? Well, it monitors TB and it sets the targets for TB and it does it diligently, but there's nowhere near the leadership and the urgency that should be brought. Well, you say, what about the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria? They give a lot of money to tuberculosis. Yes, but very little urgent leadership. Well, you say, what about UNICEF, all those children? When was the last time you heard the words TB out of the mouth of UNICEF? Well, you point out there's been a new tuberculosis envoy appointed. Yes, but he needs resources and he needs staff and he has neither. And so he's reduced to the rhetorical blandishments which are provided. Well, you think to yourself, how about the Security Council? After all, it declared AIDS and it declared Ebola a threat to international peace and security. Surely tuberculosis now falls in that realm, but not a peep. Well, finally, how about the Secretary General of the United Nations? He has the Sustainable Development Goals coming, one of which is the struggle against tuberculosis. He can use that as the peg on which to hang an effort to mobilize the world. No such effort. So when all these failures of leadership are palpable, where does the world turn? It turns to the NGOs. It turns to civil society. It turns to Doctors Without Borders and the Treatment Action Group and the Treatment Action Campaign and outfits like Results. They mobilize, they respond. It's increasingly the pattern that when the big multilateral agencies fail, civil society moves in to rescue global public health. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.